Chairman Engel, Ranking Member McCall, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to testify. I'd like to touch on three issues. First, what our strategy towards China.
Can you pull the microphone a little closer? Yeah.
Second, what China's strategy appears to be, and then third, how we might adjust our strategy in light of those insights. I'd like to begin by endorsing a point that Chairman Engel made in his opening statement. The strategy of engaging with China that we've been pursuing for the last 40 years, I think, was not a blunder, but it was a gamble, and it's become increasingly obvious that the gamble hasn't paid off. China has clearly become richer and stronger, but the CCP regime has become even more repressive and more militantly nationalistic. It continues to deploy market-distorting mercantilist economic policies, and its external behavior has become increasingly aggressive. The simplest explanation for the failure of U.S. strategy is that it underestimated the resilience, the resourcefulness, and the ruthlessness of the Chinese Communist Party and its determination to hold on to domestic political power. China's rulers appear to have three consistent strategic objectives. First and foremost, to preserve the power of the CCP. Second, to restore China to what the regime sees as its proper historic status as the preponderant power in Eastern Eurasia. And third, to become a truly global power with influence and presence on par with and perhaps eventually superior to that of the United States. And the key point, I think, is that the last two goals are related to the first. As their power has grown, China's leaders have begun to reach out beyond their borders in an attempt to reshape the world in ways that they believe will make it less threatening and more conducive to the survival of their regime. In sum, they're trying to make the world safe for authoritarianism, or at least for perpetual CCP rule of China. And this shift towards a more assertive stance began to become visible in the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis, and it's intensified markedly since the rise to power of Xi Jinping in 2012-2013. There's obviously ambition here. China's leaders believe that the U.S. is in decline and that their time has come. But there's also a good deal of insecurity and a sense of urgency. Like his predecessors, Xi fears dissent, social instability, and political unrest. He knows that China faces serious difficulties in sustaining economic growth and dealing with the needs of its aging population, among other problems. And one reason the CCP regime is pressing so hard now may be that they see a window of opportunity that they don't think is going to stay open forever. In its own neighborhood, China is trying to use its growing military capabilities to undermine the credibility of America's security guarantees and push the U.S. away, while relying on political influence operations and the increasing gravitational attraction of its own massive economy to pull others towards it. And ultimately, they seem to envision a new regional system that would extend across much of Eurasia, linked together by infrastructure and trade agreements with China at its center, and America's democratic allies either integrated and subordinated or weakened and isolated, and the United States pushed to the periphery, if not out of East Asia altogether. As regards their global ambitions, they believe that in every historical period there's a dominant power that gets to set the rules and shape the institutions in ways that serve its own interests and reflect its ideology. And in the long run, I think the regime aims to surpass the United States in terms of material capabilities and to usurp its role in shaping the international order. Of course, it's one thing to have such ambitions, quite another actually to fulfill them. So in light of these considerations, how should we adjust our strategy? The root of our problems with Beijing, in my view, is the character of the CCP regime. This is not a civilizational struggle, but it's a contest between two opposing political systems and two contending visions for the future of Asia and the world. And the history of the last several decades suggests that we have very limited capacity to encourage positive change in China, certainly not by offering yet more rewards and inducements. We need to deal with China as it is, not how we would wish it to be. But for that reason, we need to acknowledge that for the foreseeable future, the prospects for stable cooperative relations are very limited. Beijing is going to continue to push, and unless we choose to give way, a period of intensifying rivalry is therefore inevitable. A second point that should be obvious but bears repeating, and several have already said it, our prospects in this rivalry will be greatly enhanced if we can find ways to cooperate more effectively with our democratic friends and allies. Looking ahead, I think our strategy will have to be two parts defensive and one part offensive. First, and perhaps most obvious, Together with our friends and allies, we need to counter Beijing's attempts to expand its influence through coercion and subversion. And in the Indo-Pacific region, that's at root a problem of military planning and collective defense. At the same time as we seek to block some of the many vectors of China's outward expansion, we, together with our friends and allies, have to take steps to better protect our own societies, economies, and political systems from exploitation and manipulation. And this is a difficult problem, and I think it's one that we've only begun to wrestle with. In the political domain, the question is how we can best protect ourselves against Chinese influence operations without sacrificing the openness that's historically been our greatest source of strength. And in the economic realm, the challenge will be to defend against China's predatory practices, protect our technological advantages, and avoid doing things that make it easier for Beijing to sustain its current economic model without imposing undue costs on ourselves. Third and finally, we can't afford to remain entirely on the defensive in our evolving competition with China. We need to find ways to impose costs on Beijing for its egregious and harmful behavior, both at home and abroad. The proximate aim of our new strategy must be not to change the character of the CCP regime, but to protect ourselves against it. We need to demonstrate to China's current rulers that they can't succeed if they continue along their present path. In the process, it's possible that we could help to set in motion forces that will lead eventually to meaningful change. But in the meantime, to paraphrase George Kennan, we're going to have to look to our own defenses while we await the breakup or gradual mellowing of CCP power. Thank you very much, and I look forward to answering your questions.